Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Arena podcast. I'm joined this evening, as always, by Augustine. How are you doing this evening, Augustine?
I'm good, Jerome. I'm to see you again.
Yeah, you too. I suppose tonight we wanted to. It's coming up. We're just coming up on Easter week. To Sunday is Passion Sunday, and we just wanted to talk about a few topical items. Um, Using the website, actually, some of the articles that we talked about it, we were just chatting about it. We thought it might be good and to just go through deeper discussions on some of those things. One area of interest to a lot of people is a lot of people would have heard of Father P.J. Hughes, parish priest in Cavan, County Cavan, who was recently visited by the Garda Síochána and fined €500 for apparently not doing enough to stop people attending his mass, even though it's not even clear that it is legal to attend mass, thanks to that professor in Trinity College. So we might talk about a few things. Perhaps Father PJ would be a good place to start. Well, hopefully there is a miracle and someone in high up in the government actually overturns these draconian rules and permits us our natural rights to attend mass, which has been shown to be one of the safest places to be. There's a lot of, like, what a lot of atheists who don't attend mass don't realize is before all this kicked off, if you go to any typical mass before COVID kicked off, it was probably at best half full, even before anyway. During COVID, it's probably a quarter full because a lot of people would have been staying away even before the lockdown. And even with that, every second pew is sectioned off. So there's a huge amount of distancing between people in churches. And as Catholics, we tend to be very prudent and responsible and cautious. So, yeah, I would certainly hope that we can go back soon.
Yeah, so I would say the thing with Father PJ is like we have to wake up to the fact that we've never had this sort of intrusion into religious worship in Western Europe, certainly in our lifetimes. So we're at a stage now where people have to really not be afraid to have the discussion about it. And it's been good that people like Declan Gandy have gone to court and that a small number of politicians have been speaking up, because we need to talk about it in principle. You know, if the government has this authority, and how do we respond? So I don't know. It's a strange situation. I mean, a year ago, would you believe we're here now? It's very strange. And I just think that Father PJ, any rational person doesn't think what he's doing is wrong. But the fear that people have now is such that, you know, some people might say, well, he shouldn't be doing it. So I don't know. I really hope that sense prevails and you know, decency prevails, and the government acts on this fast and realize, look, Northern Ireland is back to mass. You know, Northern Ireland's not far from where Father PJ is, and they're back to mass. So, you know, I hope common sense prevails soon.
One thing I pondered as a possibility is it's shocking how many Irish people have been caught up in COVID hysteria, including a lot of Catholics as well, who might have loved to attend mass before, but now think that they just go along with the state narrative that it's a dangerous thing to interact with other people. That's a very curious phenomenon I found, and for Father PJ said himself, he was reported, and I do think there are very spiteful leftists who are just very, very happy to be going around and seeing if they could find a church who has the audacity to defy the state edict. But for the possibility that it's actually one of his parishioners who used to attend one of his masses, he didn't say that, and there's no proof of that. But it's just a very sobering thought, I think.
Go again?
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so
Did
I
you?
think that we're at a stage where those people who are reporting mass and things like that, there's there really isn't any meaningful opposition in Ireland now to the government, to the establishment. The only differences you see between the state, um, the people who are in power and the opposition parties, they're really just on irrelevant things. And so the people who are calling the Gardaí to report people for saying mass out of spite and things like that, you think back to, there was a good documentary I saw, funnily enough, I think RTE showed it around the time one of the really strict lockdowns kicked in last year. And it was a documentary on Tiananmen Square, and it was about how the ordinary Chinese young people, it wasn't necessarily about how the ones who opposed them, that was the interesting thing. The interesting one was about the ordinary people who really showed up to support the government, and how, with Mao's little red book, they wanted to take part in the oppressive state regime. And so in Ireland today, the stuff of reporting on priests, even reporting on them going to someone's house to give them communion or give them a blessing. There was an article in one of the newspapers reporting on somebody on one of the funerals in Dublin allowing 5 extra people in. So some journalist actually sat down and said, I'm going to report on these 5 extra people coming to a funeral. It's unbelievable that people could do that. And so we're at a stage now where that type of obedience to, I don't know what they're obedient to. It's like they're hungry for power. They see this kind of power and they want to take part in it, And I think that's frightening. That's frightening to see. And I think the church, as for people in the church who kind of go along with that, people are only human. I can understand that people in the church, Catholics or otherwise, are afraid of what's happening. But, we have to think this could be the same a year down the line, 2 years down the line, and what's going to be left of the church, And so I'm very mild, really, on the whole thing in general. But you do have to ask, what's the worst case scenario here? And a year ago, most people would have said where we're at now is worst case scenario. So, I just think those people who would report on a priest, or there was someone blaring out music in Limerick outside the church. Did you see that across from the Sacred Heart Church?
I did, and that was pretty disgusting.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of kind of saying, like, why? Like, I don't know. I think people in Ireland have just lost all capacity for rational thinking.
And they're completely, the lack of self-awareness with these leftists and extreme liberals, it's quite funny, because they are fully supportive of a massive increase in state oppression of civil liberties, to the mask mandate, to you can't do this, you can't go past X distance from your house. And then they would also think that they are these radical rebels of society, but they couldn't be more conformist. They're the ultimate in conformists in their current behavior. They support state actions to oppress ordinary people. They seem very excited about taking away people's freedoms, and any debate on any questioning of the COVID narrative, you're instantly a COVID denier. You're a dangerous person. You shouldn't have a voice. Maybe even you should be put in prison because you're endangering people's lives. This is what people actually write on Twitter, and they get a lot of likes and shares. There's a lot of crazy people out there that are fully supported by the establishment and fully supported by the media, just for taking away people's rights to worship freely and freely associate with other people.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's like a lot of things have happened in Ireland in the past 10 years. Most people are actually on the middle ground of this. Like most people think, okay, well, we don't want people to get sick, we don't want people to die. And in being on the middle ground, most people then will say, okay, but at the same time, I mean, you have to let us live our lives. That's the way just about everybody in Ireland is. But yet, I don't know, there's just such an extreme element now that's cropping up, and there's no, there's no real end to it in sight that's going to come about because of the efforts of the government, because they seem to be totally adrift of any proper sort of response. And it kind of brings us to what else we were going to talk about, which was on the topic of euthanasia. The fact that the same kind of far left who were talking about, zero COVID and things like that, these are the same far left people then who are trying to introduce a bill to legalize euthanasia in the middle of all of this. And it's one of those things. I mean, I think back to 2018 when we saw what happened in Dublin Castle when they were celebrating the referendum result. As if, I mean, it's like if Brazil beat Andorra in football. I mean, would they run around celebrating? Probably not, because it's only Andorra. And yet they might do it if they really hated Andorra and wanted to rub it in their faces. And that's kind of what happened in 2018 with the referendum. They were never going to lose it. So what was the purpose of that celebration? They weren't relieved to win. They didn't think they were going to lose. So it was really about kind of demoralizing ordinary people, demoralize people, saying, this is the new Ireland, this is the new normal. And so with the likes of euthanasia now, even the other stuff with everything else that's going on, the grounds for that were really sown in 2018. And euthanasia is a real new departure. And the article that's up on the website, we'll share it on screen as people look at this, is by Dr. Kevin Hay. And Kevin looks at the fact that once you legalize euthanasia, there's no going back. Once it's legal, you have to get used to the fact that euthanasia is a part of your society now. And it's the same with abortion. I mean, has any country really rolled back abortion? And so I think in order to understand the bizarre situation we find ourselves in now, I think we have to go back to how absurd it is that we have this abortion bill, ironically named Dying with Dignity. And the examples, I'll just kind of name them real quick that Dr. Kevin goes through. He talks about how the only time it was ever reversed was in Australia in '97, and that was by default because they had made the decision without federal jurisdiction or federal approval, and they'd made it in their state, so they weren't allowed to do that. But otherwise, it just spreads and spreads and spreads. And what he talks about is the fact that people talk about personal autonomy. And the examples that he goes through is that, well, you can't just have someone decide that they'd be better off dead and let that have no ripple effects on the rest of society. And so what he talks about is the fact that this is going to ripple all the way through society. It'll affect families, it'll affect the friends of those involved, and it also affects even something like suicide prevention. Like, how do you have something like Darkness into Light, where people are told to get up early, to tell people, look, it's good, stay alive, don't kill yourself. And then in the next breath, you're saying we need to legalize assisted suicide. And one of the examples that Kevin gives in it is of Abu Ghraib prison, which of course is the infamous prison in Iraq under George Bush, and then of course there was Guantanamo later under Obama as well. It stayed under Obama. But what happened there was they went in and they decided the ends justify the means. They decided they were going to start torturing these people, releasing pictures of torturing them. And that same cruelty is what's behind euthanasia. And so it's a really good article. We'll have it up on screen here, people can look at it. And it's really looking at the fact that people, they're using these euphemisms, but the message that's going out is, you know what, some life is just not worth living, and that sometimes suicide is the answer. And it's very bleak to think we're at this point, and all this other stuff that's going on, the confusion and the um, despair. It all makes sense when you think that these are the type of things that are being legalized.
The media and entertainment industry also pushed this quite hard. The concept of, oh, life isn't worth living if you become incapacitated. The film that shot Javier Bardem to fame was called The Sea Inside. It was one of his first films. It was a story about this man who was a real free spirit, and he was into all sorts of activities, and real magnetic guy, and he traveled, and he was just did his own thing, as free as a bird sort of thing. And one time he was diving off a cliff, wouldn't be Cliffs of Moher, but like a cliff face or a very high point off the shore. But the tide was in, so when he landed, there wasn't enough water, so he snapped his upper vertebrae instantly, and he was instant quadriplegic. And the film dealt with how he wanted to end his life, because the message was, well, why would you want to live? Because this guy had such an amazing life of action and using all these things. So obviously, no point living. So wasn't the Spanish government really mean not to let him kill himself? And the story went about how he did end his life at the end with the help of his friends. They did it in a very, I suppose, clever way. No one person did it. One person opened the vial of poison. Someone else took their spoon out of the drawer. Another person put the spoon in it. So another person put the spoon in the drink. Another person stirred it. Like, it was very convoluted, so they could kind of like deny any responsibility. And he was successful in killing himself in the end. But I suppose the message was like, they shouldn't have gone to the situation. He should have been allowed to kill himself completely. What I found very inspirational on the other side was this. I don't know the guy's name. He was a university professor, very successful guy, and he slowly got a debilitating muscle disease, which slowly over time deprived him of all muscular movement. And it was very gradual, up to the point where he was only able to communicate by moving his eye. And he was able to come up with a method of communication to people just by moving one eye. And he continued his university career completely quadriplegic. And he thought, okay, I have been dealt a pretty grim hand. I can choose to not to engage with life, or I could just use this as a challenge to, okay, let's use whatever I have to still live, because you can. That's the person I admire. He chose to engage with life, the amazing gift of life with which he was endowed. I thought that was quite inspirational.
Yeah, and it's funny about Hollywood. There was a great movie about the life of a guy who the exact same thing happened to him. Jean-Dominique Bobby was his name. He was a French fashion writer, and he had a stroke. And he had the locked-in syndrome as well. And again, he could only communicate with his eye, but he ended up writing a book about his life with his one eye. See, the other one had to be sewed up because it was getting infected or something from staying open. And so in that, there was a really it's kind of it's a movie that really plays on your mind. It was really it's almost kind of bleak in some ways because you know he's going to die at the end of it, and the film uses this angle where you're always looking at everything from his point of view, and so it's kind of actually a little disconcerting to watch. But at the end of it, um, towards the end of it, there's an incredible scene where they're bringing him to Lourdes, and he remembers going to Lourdes because he was French, obviously, and he remembers going to Lourdes years before with what was his mistress, and they went to Lourdes, and she ended up saying she wanted this big statue of Mary, and she ends up breaking up with him there, and the way it's filmed is actually quite nice. The way it's filmed when he goes back to Lourdes, it goes out at nighttime and it's raining and stuff, and it shows all the lights of the gift shops and things. But it was kind of showing you the rich interior life that he was having. And then there's also the fact that he gives a lot of meaning to the people around him, their lives, through his life living on. And so even though he starts off negative, eventually he comes into seeing the purpose of it. And those are extreme examples. And yet, unlike, okay, let's say you take abortion, right? The problem with abortion is someone says, oh, like this kid would have a poor life, this kid would have this and that life. And it's very hard for people who are against abortion to present convincing arguments to say, oh no, like, that doesn't mean their life isn't worth living. People just aren't convinced by it, unfortunately. But with these people, we've had some of them who, in their own words, we can offer them as an example. And so, I see in what Kevin wrote, he says that one of the things he actually says is that with palliative care, he says that killing a patient is cheap, so the funding for expensive palliative care programs gets reduced, and that in turn leads to more people seeking euthanasia. And the Irish palliative care groups have actually spoken out against this being introduced here. And so I don't know if people think about the knock-on effects. I mean, this is going to affect healthcare. If you're going to have, if you have X amount of kids each year are born with such an illness, or you have X amount of people each year come down with such an illness that's really debilitating, and that gets X amount of funding. But if half those people are getting euthanized, that funding is going to dry up. Or if euthanasia is available, just going to just get euthanized. So the pressure becomes to be euthanized, and so it's a very bleak thing, and especially in the middle of what we're going through now. We're told to stay inside, do all the stuff for other people, and most people don't mind doing it. Most people don't mind doing it because most people are good natured, and if they're told if you do this, this will get a good result, people are happy to go along with it. But then the same people doing it are turning around, primarily the left in Ireland, they're turning around and saying we should legalize euthanasia, and they can't even talk about it honestly. A bit like abortion, it has to be in euphemisms. It has to be through saying, oh, it's dying with dignity, and they'll use the worst case example, and they won't talk about people being pressured and things like that. So we're really in the midst of it now. We talk about how it must have felt to live in Soviet Russia and places like that. Our situation is not as extreme as theirs, but it's as bizarre. And one of the things I was reading when I was looking into euthanasia earlier was I was seeing that in the Soviet Union, in 1980, was it 1980, the Moscow Olympics? It was said that one of them was asked about hosting the Paralympics, one of the ministers, and he said, well, we don't have any disabled people in Russia because they just weren't a part of their society. And that's the way we're going in Ireland.
Yeah, it will. A lot of people say, "Oh, I would hate to get Alzheimer's, and I just wouldn't want to live." There have been cases where, in other countries where euthanasia is legal, that people said, "Yeah, I don't want to live," and they made their will. But it brings up like a very curious ethical constraint, because of course, when there was a case when such a person said, "No, I wouldn't want to live by euthanasia," and then the time came and they did develop euthanasia, and there was a team of people who are just going to end this person's life because it was apparently what this person wished for. And this person had to be held down for the needle to go into their arm. So the person before the degraded mental state didn't want something, but the wishes of the person after was not respected at all. In Netherlands, I believe, this teenage girl who had apparently intense depression, she was allowed to end her life, which was, I just thought that was just so horrific, because their depression is an extremely debilitating disease, but it can be treated. And for us to say, well, she obviously knows the best thing to do with her life, and who are we to interject? You would also, as Ireland becomes more materialistic as well, and euthanasia is legalized, and you could see the scenario whereby possibly selfish siblings would utilize euthanasia law to say, well, my mother always said she wouldn't want to live anyway.
Yeah,
but perhaps their motivation would be not wanting to pay a nursing home bill for the next 3 or 4 years. So it would be a callous attempt to save money, and of course the state would happily approve or agree with this request, because it would save the state money as well. We've just seen the Irish state, its attitude to life in general over the past few years, which is, it's kind of funny in some way, in a very sardonic and very black sense, how they say they're so committed to saving lives with COVID, but there's so many people who are dying through suicide, depression today, and also from abortion, and they've no problem with that.
Yeah, and the Netherlands example, the problem I suppose we have with euthanasia is that there are pro-life groups, but if you take, for example, the United States, a lot of pro-life activism around the world will get its talking points from the United States. We've had 50 years of abortion, and they've a lot of, every sort of resource you need, every argument you need, every example you need of how to protest against it. But euthanasia is relatively new in the type of form we're seeing it now. And, it doesn't really have a concerted lobby against it. A lot of the pro-life groups will do it, but they just haven't really got a chance, because it's just, on top of abortion, especially in Ireland, we just had abortion, now we have this. So it's very hard to go, to switch on. So a lot of people aren't aware of the horror stories with this as they are with Belgium as they are with abortion. And so, just to read real quick to what was in the article, there was just 3 definitions, because euthanasia is kind of a blanket one that's used, but the 3 ones that are here are assisted suicide, where a person takes a legally provided toxic dose of medication to die at their own hand. So assisted suicide, they hand it to you and you take it. Voluntary euthanasia, which is a healthcare provider legally injects a lethal dose to intentionally kill a willing person, which is what is allowed under the bill. So the healthcare provider is allowed to do that to you if you agree to it. Okay. Or of course, we know that might probably mean that on behalf of your carer, if you can't consent to it. A person, and then involuntary euthanasia is where a person, typically a healthcare provider or family member, administers a lethal dose to intentionally kill an unwilling person, which is what you talk about. And Dr. Kevin rightly points out that that's murder. That's what reasonable people will call it. And so there was just one more thing he said that I thought was really important. If I can find it here now, he was talking about how, and we put a little link to the end of the article where it was talking about suicide, and he mentions suicide contagion. So it says mainstream media tout the recipients of euthanasia as heroes and heroines. They persuade vulnerable people that euthanasia is the strong and compassionate thing to do. This leads to the Werther syndrome, which involves suicide contagion, so copycat suicide, as people will call it, We will likely see an increase in the suicide of children of previous recipients of euthanasia also. I mean, that's unbelievably bleak stuff. And I read Gino Kenny make the argument that this was for people in terrible situations, people who couldn't go on and so forth. That's why anybody commits suicide. Anybody, you could say anybody commits suicide because they don't want to go on. So you are legitimizing suicide without a doubt.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You made a great point about the darkness into light, and that's one of the beautiful things about Irish society, the way people come together to actually do something about suicide and mental illness. And there's a lot of mental health and mental illness charities in Ireland. They should be ramping up their PR to the max, really, to publicize this bill. See, a big problem too in a lot of charities in Ireland is they feel they have to be politically correct and go along with the government message for pretty much most things. It does take a very courageous institution to publicly go against what seems to be popular. Um, just to go against it solely on the grounds of it's a right thing to do. That's something that's sorely lacking. I mean, that's why Father PJ's, just getting back to him, he's such an inspiration. He's standing up. Now, other priests, this is not to say other priests might be having mass surreptitiously, but he happened to have just been. This was public because he was actually fined, because he was shopped in. But no, getting back to your point, the specter of euthanasia in Ireland, it's just so horrific, but it's also quite bleak as well, because the Marxist element in Irish society who've been successful for the past several years seem to be on a sort of a roll. Sinn Fein were roundly sidelined by Irish media. Maybe after the Good Friday Agreement, there was some warming up, but anytime Jerry Adams spoke or was critical of government, they would always mention the thing, blood on your hands, and what are your ties to the IRA and this sort of stuff. And when Mary Lou came on, then all of that was gone because, well, Mary Lou wasn't in the IRA, so we can't criticize her there. But besides, she's a woman, so we need to celebrate women in politics. So it's funny that Sinn Fein are one of the vanguards of the euthanasia bill. It's just very sad development.
Yeah, I think their support for it was probably more, how to describe it, more tacit than anything else. I think people before profit have been the real architects of it. But like, I mean, the left are the left, really, aren't they? I mean, people before profit and Sinn Féin are bedfellows. But once,
Yeah,
the big thing we've seen these past few weeks is that the story in Northern Ireland where we've had abortion close to being introduced, and Mary Lou McDonald released a statement today. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So in 2017, Louise O'Reilly of Sinn Féin objected to 3 Fianna Fáil TDs. I don't know if any of them are still TDs because one of them definitely didn't get re-elected, but 3 Fianna Fáil TDs put in that they wanted it to include basically abortion on demand up to 12 weeks for any reason, right? And there was something in there about for rape or incest or something. And Sinn Féin actually objected to it. And so go forward to 2018, when it was being discussed by Carol Nolan in the Dáil, they brought forward the amendment to say, you can't abort a disabled child or a child because of gender. And Sinn Féin said this is misogynistic. And I was like, what? So Sinn Féin actually then supported eugenic abortion in 2018 when the amendment came, as did most politicians in the Dáil. So most politicians in the Dáil specifically rejected the amendment, which would have banned abortion on disabled children or aborted them because they were a girl or boy. And so in Northern Ireland now, for anyone who doesn't know, Westminster was basically dissolved for a short amount of time. Or sorry, not Westminster, Stormont was, which is the parliament there. And when Stormont was dissolved, Westminster was allowed to make the decisions for Northern Ireland directly. So while that happened, they brought in same-sex marriage and abortion. Now, look, same-sex marriage is, it's a civil thing. As long as they don't force the churches to do it, it is what it is. It's not something I think we should devote too much time to, other than in theory. I think right now, once the civil laws pass it, as long as they don't force it on the churches, the abortion thing is more important. And the abortion one was imposed from Westminster. And you're thinking to yourself, Sinn Féin have always been against Westminster having rule. And Mary Lou McDonald released a statement this week telling the DUP to stop interfering with this law coming in. They said this law has to be allowed in as soon as possible. And she said that they brought forward a ridiculous motion last week. And she said it was, I can't remember the exact term she used, but basically she was implying that it wasn't serious. But the amendment they brought forward was that disabled children would not be allowed to be aborted. And some of these disabled children, it's very simple things like club foot, cleft palate. I mean, these aren't serious. This isn't a fatal fetal abnormality, as they call it. These are very basic. When I say very basic, if you take the cleft palate, I mean, there are many children who can have that amended by surgery, and so it's not the hopeless case that they presented as. That's what I meant to say by basic. So it's not as simplistic as it's a hopeless case. Forget about it. So Sinn Féin have sold out any morals they ever had, any principles they ever had, and now we're at a point where it's they don't care, and it's really absurd. And it's Catholics who support Sinn Féin, they're supporting their grandfathers Sinn Féin. They're definitely not supporting whatever these people are now.
Sinn Féin really, I think, have I see them. I'd be tempted to call them a joke, except for the disturbing amount of support they have in the working class in Ireland, particularly working class areas of Dublin. It just shows how lacking in discourse the Irish political movement is. Just as a sideline, we are going to have an interview with Eugene Jordan, author of this really fantastic book, which presents essentially, I suppose, a legal defense of the nuns in Ireland, who are the center of just unprecedented ridicule, particularly regarding the Tuam mother and baby home. But he made a point in his book, which I'm currently reading, about Irish politics and media. They basically they don't allow any credible discussion or dissent to the establishment view, and media and the university establishment has very shocking levels of lack of quality control and standards on their research. It's and I don't know what it is. Anything in Ireland that the globalist government wants, it seems like the media and university establishment is just rose and right behind them, and anyone who dissents in any using a fact-based manner to dissent is just they go insane with anger, and they assassinate the person's character. They use ad hominems. They ban their social media accounts. it's quite the story. But yeah, we'll have Eugene on in a few weeks, and we very much look forward to talking to him about some of this stuff.
And that kind of plays into how Sinn Féin treated Paddy Houlihan, doesn't it? That's how they treated him.
Oh yeah,
You know, he's I mean, the guy is not, you know, he doesn't seem to be particularly traditional as such, you know, but he said anything that was mildly off kilter. And it's kind of with Sinn Féin, I think focusing on them, like obviously Eugene's a good example of someone who's taken flack for daring to think differently. But Sinn Féin are you have to think where's Ireland going to be in 5 years or 10 years? You know, Sinn Féin right now are what some young people and ordinary adults think are a way of the future, and you know some of their people are formed with very extreme, as you say, Marxist views, and so we have abortion, we have euthanasia, we have priests being arrested for saying mass. You know, you just have to think to yourself, I don't have an answer for this. I just think, where's all this going? You know, the world is in a dark place, and if you think just over 100 years ago, the messages of Fatima, you think of you know, the things that have happened in the church the past 50 years. I don't know. I just hope there's some hope around the corner, some great saints or some great popes, or you know, I don't think it's any one thing, but I hope there's just an upswell of something great to get things going on the right track again, you know, because where we're headed now, it just feels like we're headed for some sort of you can feel it in the air. I don't know. You feel it in the air in the run up to 2018, but you feel it now more than ever. We're headed towards some really sad and dark future, at least in the near future, in this country especially. Um, and so I don't know. I just don't know where it's going to go in the next few years. Um, I'm a pessimistic in a worldly sense. I mean, in a faithful sense, I'm sure it'll all work out okay, you know. But yeah, I mean, you can see bad things happening down the road, and the silencing of dissenters, the silencing of people, like we were saying, like Eugene, just even if he's researched what he has to say, that's not that doesn't make a healthy society. It's not conducive to a healthy society, you know. And the people we disagree with, we don't want them silenced. You know, people are free to talk, but you know, it's we can tell that towards people who are Catholic or anyway traditional, um, dissent is just not going to be tolerated in the new Ireland that Mary Lou was promoting on RT the other night. Um, there's no place for Catholics or anyone who dissents from the globalist point of view.
yeah. Mary Lou will not tolerate being her cooperating with London to bring in laws which will kill Irish people. She won't be interrupted in that endeavor. So it's actually sexist to actually try to deny Mary Lou's dalliances with London. I don't like that expression, but you can't make this stuff up. Like 30 years ago, would anyone have thought that the leader of Sinn Féin would be colluding with the British government to bring in a law to kill Irish people? It beggars belief. But maybe we could end on sort of a positive note. One of the things which I took heart in was your idea to get Catholics to canvass their politicians to basically say if you don't support the overturning of the ban on mass, basically, that we won't vote for you. You saw some good feedback from that, did you?
Yeah, yeah, we got lots of emails back on that stuff, and a lot of, the gas thing was, I mean, a lot of the replies from the TDs were fairly reasonable and polite and commendable towards the church in their tone, and it was surprising, really. And I mean, to be fair, some of the Sinn Féin ones were the most polite, Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil, which is now Fianna Fáil obviously has a lot of, you know, they might have sold out old Ireland, but they obviously still have a lot of people who are, you know, at least want to be seen to be close to old Ireland. And maybe the same with Sinn Féin. But no, to be fair to them, they were polite about it. But I suppose the thing for people to realize about it, the important thing is, um, when you go right now, unfortunately, politics is very important, and every country in the Western world has incredible political power if they choose to wield it, and most of them are choosing to wield it. If you just think back, I mean, it's hard to remember now when Donald Trump was president. Now that he's gone, but when he was president, I mean, it was nonstop every day, the only thing on the news, and so we're at a point now where in Ireland, um, politics is just unfortunately, I wish it was religion that we're talking about every day, but politics is so important. And the other thing is Catholics have to get used to the fact that just because um, such and such from Fianna Fáil or Sinn Féin doesn't mean you should vote for them. Okay, you should vote for your own interests and vote for the interests of your church. Don't vote for people who are going to do something against you. You don't owe them your vote. Like, you wouldn't do that to a bishop. If a bishop showed up tomorrow and said, "I want you to vote for me for bishop," you say, "I'm not voting for that guy. He's this, this, and this. He thinks he's so great." So people shouldn't be so naive when it comes to politics, and politic people as well. I say this advice to people: if you get a chain letter, if you get someone sending you an email that's copy and paste, amend it before you send it, and maybe shorten it. Like, you can send the same one yourself to a load of people, but if you're sending on the same one from someone else's words, it's not going to have the same effect. So just be honest, straight to the point. Get across what you got to get across to them. Because they're obviously getting a lot of emails. And as Catholics, people have to start voting as Catholics. It's not as simple as living in your own bubble, going to mass every Sunday. You can do that for your own salvation, and you should, which is great. But if you want to look outwardly then and say, how did Ireland end up this way? Okay, prayer comes first, but then after that, you have to put it into action, and you have to start voting for people who aren't going to do the things that we've seen. It's as simple as that. So that's the important lesson for people to learn.
I think we could take inspiration from American Catholics, who I think do a very good job of they unashamedly promote pro-life politicians, and they would advocate not voting for a politician who is pro-abortion. Basically, we seem in Ireland to have a reluctance to engage in politics, but like you said, we would just encourage people to. It's too important to ignore now, and we are a formidable lobby, and if we use it effectively and start engaging in politics, obviously we know that Christ is king and he will ultimately prevail. But at the same time, we still can make an effort to improve our country and the respect for human life while we're here by engaging intelligently with the political machine that it's there for us. It's almost inviting us to start engaging with it. And if we hold politicians to account, politicians very much respond to votes. Politicians in Ireland are ridiculously well paid compared to other jurisdictions, and they get a lot of expenses and perks from being politicians. And quite frankly, they wouldn't be able to match that in the private sector. So they are very incentivized to keep that income stream running as long as possible, and we should use that to our advantage.
Yeah, like, you don't go through the drive-through McDonald's and then just say, yeah, just throw something in, whatever, I don't mind. All right, you go in and ask for what you want. So if you go into the polling booth, you ask for exactly what you want to get. It's not the X Factor or something like that. You don't owe these people anything. Just they owe you. You want to get something out of them. That's all there is to politics, and think of how cynical a lot of these people are. So that's the way it is. But it actually doesn't have to be you versus them all the time. Even let them know that, your vote depends on this topic. They don't really hear, they don't hear as much from pro-life people as they do from um, left-wing people on left-wing issues, So that's a big part of it too. Okay, we have to look at ourselves first. It's easy for us to say why, because the big one is we have to look and say, well, hang on, why did so many Fianna Fáil people turn around and vote for abortion after saying they were against it? And so it's because now obviously they couldn't rely on the people's votes because a lot of them didn't get re-elected, especially the really pro-abortion ones. But it's handy because there's always a free job as a senator, which pays even better. Does it pay even better? It pays very well anyway. And some of them got
Not as
that.
good, but it's still like I keep saying, it would be far superior to any typical job they can expect in the private sector.
Yeah. So look where we're at now: abortion, euthanasia, priests being jailed for saying mass. People have to get pragmatic here. They have to get practical. And one of those is keeping regular contact with your TD. Let them know you exist. If they don't hear from you, or if the only thing they hear from you is you send them someone else's words, then you don't exist. All right. So I know they can be a pain and stuff, but we still have to talk to them as if they're still Irish people like us. A lot of them were probably baptized and had a communion or confirmed. So a lot of them were raised Catholic too, or might even still consider themselves culturally Catholic. So, like anybody else, we have to try talk to them and try persuade them. That's the prudent thing to do.
Like you said before, most people in Ireland are relatively normal, and while the media and political class might despise Catholics, most people don't, and even most politicians, most TDs rather, wouldn't. So people should be cognizant of that as well. And you're right, we are kind of peculiar. The slide in mass attendance has been dramatic, but that still means that a lot of people in the past, like every TD, pretty much would have gone to mass as a child, even if they're now an avowed atheist.
Yeah, and that kind of I suppose we'll kind of come towards the end here now, but that kind of brings us to something we're going to talk about on a future show, which is the upcoming Synod of the Irish Church. And those politicians who might have known going to mass when they're younger and all that stuff, the next generation of them are not even going to know that, to be honest. And so we are preparing for this synod, and a certain group of priests in Ireland have made it clear that they think that this is their synod. And we need to make it clear that it's not their synod. And we need to make it clear that in the same way we have to lobby our politicians, we have to lobby our bishops so that the actual people's voices get heard and not this small little band of extremists who think that they own the Catholic Church. And so that to build towards the future.
Are you talking about the CCP? I mean ACP. Little joke there.
That's maybe. Well, we won't suggest they're communists, but yeah, the ACP. I mean, I'll just say, excuse me, I'll just say one last thing about them, because we can save it for another day. But they've been one of their guys was on the radio the other day, and the way they were speaking, it was the sense, they'll talk about clericalism, and the sense of entitlement of these people is incredible. They were acting as if like, how dare they do this? And they have turned on the Pope so quickly, and because he's no use to them anymore. And so we, ordinary Catholics have to stand up and say to this group, enough's enough. You're not going to do to us what, those people are doing to the German church. Because younger people are just going to have to clean up the mess for decades to come. So enough is enough. And this synod, a lot of people are obviously pessimistic about this synod because of this group. But if people stand up to them and lobby their bishops, then this synod, it could be a chance of people airing a lot of this stuff that they're worried about and clearing up how it should approach things like abortion and euthanasia.
God willing, for sure. So should we call that a wrap then?
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone, and please remember, like and subscribe.
Great. Thanks, Buzz. See you the next time.
Okay.